Hello and welcome back to Poli-Sci 110. In today's lecture, I will examine the question, can we trust public opinion? Many of us have heard that American voters are ill-informed, that they don't know much about current events. And so therefore, whenever we see an opinion poll, we wonder, can we really trust those numbers? Is it really right to listen to public opinion if you are an elected legislator? So first, I'll talk about some examples of how ill-informed individual voters are, but then ultimately I will argue that public opinion is quite useful for a number of purposes and that it is a trustful or reliable barometer of what the American public really thinks on average. So can we trust public opinion? If we were to look at some questions, from some polls, it would seem that we should not trust public opinion. So a number of years ago, I think in the late 2000s, a public opinion polling company asked a farcical question. They asked, would you support or oppose bombing Agrabah? Now, if you are a baby of the 1990s like I am, or maybe even if you were born earlier, that is later, then you might know that Agrabah is a fictional land of Aladdin, a Disney character. So would people support or oppose bombing Agrabah? Well, among Democrats, nearly 20%, and among Republicans, 30% would support bombing Agrabah. This place doesn't exist, so this would really suggest, these people might be gung-ho to bomb a place they've never heard of or doesn't even know exists. We can look at other public opinion polls. Do you think Santa Claus is a Democrat or a Republican? People tend to be divided on this. People mostly are not sure. And 28% think Santa is a Democrat, 22% think Santa is a Republican. What about the Grinch, favorable or unfavorable? Well, perhaps for good reason, most people have an unfavorable opinion of the Grinch. But a full 18% have favorable. So that's interesting. I wonder if they know who the Grinch is. And if we were to actually ask about something that is politically relevant, that is whether certain rights can be found in the First Amendment to the US Constitution, then things start to look more serious. Perhaps people really don't know their rights or the US Constitution very well. So a full 78% of people do believe that freedom of religion is in the First Amendment. So that's great, that's correct. We're on the right track. 73% think that the freedom to criticize government is in the First Amendment, and that's right too. The freedom of petition or redress of grievances, otherwise the freedom of speech or of the press, that is correct. Those are both included in the First Amendment. However, things get to be a little bit strange after this latter option. So 55% of people think that trial by jury is in the First Amendment. Well, it is in the Constitution, but it's in the Sixth Amendment. The right to vote, 53%, not the First Amendment again, but it is found in bits and pieces throughout the Constitution. The right to own a gun, that's the Second Amendment. So at least we're still on, constitutional grounds. Have an attorney. That is not necessarily in the Constitution, but the Supreme Court has ruled that you do have a right to an attorney. Avoid self-incrimination, that's a Fifth Amendment. You plead the Fifth. And then when we get to 36% of Americans, the right to women to vote, not the First Amendment, but the 19th Amendment, the right to a public education, that is not in the Constitution at all. And finally, 21% of Americans think that the right to own pets is in the US Constitution, and 17% think that the right to drive a car is in the Constitution. So are people really informed about their rights and liberties or what's in the First Amendment? If we were to compare people's abilities to name the 5 freedoms in the First Amendment to the 5 members of the Simpsons family, more often people are able to name all 5 members of the Simpsons family than they are all 5 freedoms listed in the First Amendment. One good thing, however, is that about 72% of people can name one or more rights within that First Amendment. However, things start to get dicey after that. So a lot more Americans can name 2 members of the Simpsons family than they can name 2 liberties listed in the First Amendment. So is the public informed? Can we trust public opinion, particularly when people don't even know much about their rights or liberties or the Constitution? Well, I'm going to argue here, or I do argue, that individual voters typically are not that informed. Many of us don't know all of the details of public policy. We don't look at government reports or data. That's not our job. We have more important things to worry about: our everyday jobs, our families, our friends, clubs that we might be in. So informed voters, not so much. However, on average, public opinion does tend to reflect what is going on in the news and what people tend to think on average. So there is a value in polls because it presents an average idea of what people think. And an average, of course, is not based on an individual, but it's based on what everyone is thinking at the time, all weighted equally. So for example, public opinion tends to shift based on the state of the economy. If we were to look at what percentage of Americans say that the most important issue facing the country right now is unemployment, that actually tends to correspond pretty well to unemployment rates if we look at data from 1980 to 2015. People tend to know that the economy is not performing so well based on news or even perhaps based on their own personal financial situation. And so even though many people might have enjoyed a prosperous job during times of high unemployment and might not have been aware of high unemployment, is that average balance of opinions that tells us what Americans are thinking about. So public opinion is not about what individuals per se are thinking about, but it's about the average of what multiple voters or Americans in general are thinking about. Now, what determines opinion? There's a variety of factors at the individual level and at the group level that serves to govern public opinion, or what people tend to think or report that they think about certain issues. So at the individual level, political scientists have found that socialization, self-interest, and elites actually matter. Socialization is a learning process by which people acquire their enduring opinions, beliefs, and values. Sources can include your family, particularly your parents, which tend to give you your partisan affiliation, or people tend to inherit their partisan affiliation from their parents very often. It includes your school, your peers, media, political leaders, and churches even. You're socialized to think of a certain way or to see the world in a certain lens, and therefore have certain opinions, liberal or conservative or otherwise. But also there's self-interest. People tend to be quite motivated when it comes to issues that affect them personally. So for example, homeowners might be very concerned about property taxes. Some couples might be very concerned about adoption policies. Some people with medical ailments might be very concerned about policies that govern certain drugs or even the medical use of marijuana, for example. And so people tend to be more informed often on these issues that affect them specifically, and they tend to have stronger opinions on those issues. But also, political elites can help to guide public opinion. Elites are really people who you would see on television, on the internet, or read online or book from quite often. So these include your politicians, your journalists, your pundits, your experts as well. Those help to shape opinions within individual people. But also we can see massive events shape public opinion among thousands of people at once. Examples of those events might include the Great Depression, the terrorist attacks of September 11, 2001. It might include technological changes, such as the introduction of the internet into households across the country. So people can form opinions based on things that they experience as individuals, but based on things also that they've experienced along with many other people as well. Can we really trust public opinion though? Is it stable? There are a few things that we should know about trends in public opinion that I believe makes it a more reliable indicator of what Americans are thinking over time. Opinion is generally stable on most issues. And I'm not talking about within individuals. People change their minds often, but I'm talking about the average public opinion taken across many thousands of individuals over time. Opinion is generally stable on most issues, particularly abortion, most economic issues, and fundamental patriotic values. So what does this mean? It means that on average, there tend to be these values that Americans are divided over, or such as abortion, or united over, such as these fundamental patriotic values. And those public opinions really don't change much over decades. However, there are issues where people do or have become more liberal or conservative over time as a whole or as a group. The public has become discernibly more liberal in areas such as the political treatment of communists, same-sex marriage, marijuana legalization, race-related issues, and gender-related issues. What are some examples of stability in public opinion? If we look at polls of abortion opinion, so this is the same question asked by Gallup nearly every year between 1975 and 2020. And consistently, we found fairly large, sometimes 50%, as low as 34, sometimes as low as 48%, or as high as 61%, say that abortion should be legal only under certain circumstances. And we've seen more conservative and more liberal opinions be stable as well. We've also found that the share of Americans who say that taxes are too high has tended to be stable despite the fact that there have been economic recessions and inflation along the way. So in this chart, we have the percentage of Americans who say taxes are too high, and then we have the inflation rate in the dotted line here. And despite the fact that inflation and the economy have improved or not improved over time at different rates, they fluctuated, Americans consistently tend to dislike taxes, it seems. And that is based on polling from 1947 until about 1989. But there are other issues on which people have changed as a whole. So for example, if we look at the percentage of people who are opposed to communists or radicals being allowed to speak on radio, hold meetings, join the Communist Party, or make a speech, we'll find that opposition to communists making speeches has declined over time. So it used to be that Americans were much more opposed to communists doing these things throughout the 30s, 40s, 50s, and 60s. But the make a speech polling question, which has been asked of Americans more often, has shown a more gradual acceptance, at least. Not necessarily in approval of communism, but this openness towards at least allowing members of the party to speak. We've also seen a historic shift on support towards legalizing gay and lesbian relations between consenting adults. And so today, support is for legalization is around 73 to 72%, but it used to be around 32% as of the late 80s. So there has been a reversal on this issue in public opinion. And we've also seen Americans become more open to the use of marijuana from the 1960s until the mid-2010s as well. This switch seems to have been more recent, occurring around 2012 or so. And as well, Americans are more approving of marriage between races, particularly between Blacks and whites. Only 4% approved when this question was asked in 1958, and now 87% approve as well as of 2013. It's probably even slightly higher as of today in 2021. So can we trust public opinion? We know that public opinion is stable on some issues, but has changed on many others as well. People have become more polarized. The Democratic and Republican parties have grown more apart in policy positions. This is another major trend in public opinion. Members of Congress are more polarized than at any time since just before the Civil War. The public is polarized only on some issues, however, and those tend to be the issues in the news. When politicians speak, people tend to polarize in response. Polarized people tend to be more attuned with politics, but are less civil with those whom they disagree with. So in sum, major trends in political opinion research suggest that it is a trustworthy barometer of what Americans are thinking on average, even though Americans may change their opinions as individuals or they may not be particularly informed themselves. The three trends are that on most issues, public opinion has remained generally stable. There are exceptions, including on the political acceptance of communists, same-sex marriage, marijuana use, for example, or race and gender-related issues. And people have also become more polarized as well.